18-year-old Brittany Gargal had lived in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, all her life. Her family was big, and when her parents split when she was younger, they went on to create an even bigger one. Brittany now had 4 younger sisters who looked up to her a lot, as she had recently reconnected with her biological father after some years. They didn't skip a beat and were loving spending so much time together. Her friends said she was outspoken, never one to hold back her opinions. She was adventurous and enjoyed snowboarding, boating, and camping. Brittany was feisty with a great sense of humor and was never short of people that wanted to hang out with her. She was busy having just started back at school and had been saving money working 2 jobs. She wanted to finish school, go to college to study business, and then move into the hospitality industry. Authorities started piecing together the previous day. They already knew that she had been out in the evening, which narrowed down her time of death considerably. Brittany's friend, Adisha, was the first to come forward, and the pair had been close for years. Adisha said Brittany would come to her for advice, and when Adisha found out Brittany had dropped out of school, she was the person that encouraged her to go back and get her grades. On March 24th, Adisha had lent her some money for gas and asked her what her plans were. Brittany told her she was meeting up with a few friends and might go to a party. Natasha hugged her goodbye saying, "All right, girl, I'll see you soon." But she hadn't heard anything after that. The person she had been out drinking with, her best friend of many years, Cheyenne, was next to talk. The pair got close when Brittany found out about Cheyenne's tumultuous childhood and adolescence and became a big support for her. They were inseparable, spending most of their days together, and going out for drinks was something they did often. Their night began just after midnight, with Brittany uploading a selfie of the 2 of them before they left. Cheyenne told police they had gone to several places together in Brittany's car, starting off at Manchester's Brew Pub. Later they went to a house party, then headed across town to the Colonial Pub and Grill. But Cheyenne said the house party was heavy and, after they left, the night was hazy. She did vaguely remember something happening in the Colonial Pub and Grill that she worried might be behind what had happened to her friend. Brittany had started speaking to a random man at the bar, and the pair seemed to be hitting it off. Brittany asked him for a lighter and invited him to have drinks with them. Before Cheyenne could get to know him, Brittany and the man left. Brittany didn't say where they were going, and Cheyenne didn't get the man's name. She didn't even see what direction they had left in, or if they were on foot or driving in Brittany's car. All she could remember was that he was white and it was around 4 a.m. For some reason, Brittany had Cheyenne's phone, and Cheyenne had made her way back to visit her uncle, who corroborated her coming to see him by herself. Cheyenne couldn't offer up any more information, and what she had was blurry anyway. A few hours after she last saw her friend, a worried Cheyenne posted on Facebook, "Where you? Haven't heard from you. Hope you made it home safe. Love ya." Officers needed to find this mystery man, but they had little to go on. It is unconfirmed where Brittany's car was found, but when it was covered in dust, dirt, dark marks on the side, and had long grass in the tires. Cheyenne's phone was in the car, seemingly confirming that Brittany had taken it as she had left, and maybe she and the man had driven somewhere rather than walked. Detectives checked the footage from the Colonial Pub and Grill, but they could not see Cheyenne or Brittany anywhere, and the bar had no recollection of them being there. However, it was a busy night, and it was possible that Cheyenne's timings were off. As Cheyenne's phone was found in Brittany's car, they hoped that the phone data could be analyzed to show other locations Brittany had gone to that night and fill in the gaps that Cheyenne couldn't. Cheyenne's phone had pinged at a McDonald's at 4:30 a.m., but she had made no mention of this. So, did Brittany go there after leaving the bar? Brittany's autopsy results finally came back, and it confirmed as they suspected that she had been strangled to death. They now felt confident that the belt found near her body was the murder weapon. Detectives kept trying to piece together Cheyenne's story, but they had a bad feeling in the back of their minds. Something about it was very off. Although it was entirely possible she had got things confused and her timings were wrong because she was intoxicated, there was just nothing to indicate they were ever in the Colonial Pub and Grill, a place Cheyenne was adamant they were, and the same place Brittany allegedly met this unknown mystery man. The months were passing by, and it was now September 2015. Investigators were still in the same place that they were back in March. People were still in shock and couldn't believe this had happened. Many a tribute was pouring in, including a big one from Cheyenne. They decided to go back to talk to Cheyenne's uncle again, and he was far more evasive than last time. But after some pushing, he suddenly had more to say. He told police that Cheyenne had said the pair had met 2 people in the bar that morning and gone back to a motel with them. The only thing she told him was that they were black males, whereas before she said Brittany was talking to a white male, but she said she couldn't remember their names, what they were wearing, or where the motel was. She said at the motel they were all smoking marijuana and an argument allegedly broke out over some cocaine. Cheyenne went to the bathroom. When she came back, she found Brittany dead on the bed with marks on her neck. She told her uncle that the two men had pulled a gun on her and forced her to cover up what they had done. Although they didn't believe this story for various reasons, Cheyenne was at least admitting she knew Brittany had been killed before she called the police to identify her. She had put herself at the scene and spoke of the marks on her neck. Cheyenne had racked up a long list of convictions and had over 50 since the age of 12. At this point, she was already in custody for another crime, so they could easily question her. The once so helpful and concerned friend that was happy to talk was suddenly quiet, uncooperative, and evasive. And when she didn't give them a thing, they had no choice but to leave. It was now over a year later and police were hitting a wall. They felt they had exhausted every witness and lead. Most CCTV had long since expired and didn't tell them anything anyway, and no one had anything else to offer up. They still only had one person of interest, Cheyenne. Investigators had been going through Brittany and Cheyenne's social media accounts with a fine-tooth comb, wondering if something was staring them in the face. A comment buried away or a message they hadn't seen. And then finally, they spotted something huge. In the tribute post Cheyenne had uploaded, the top half of the girls' outfits could clearly be seen. They realized that Cheyenne was wearing a belt that they recognized all too well. It was the same belt found by Brittany's body and what they now believed to be the murder weapon. The marks around her neck matched the weave of the belt exactly, and police said the marks on the car were consistent with coming from the belt. With this fresh information, the belt was sent for more thorough DNA testing. Experts found Cheyenne and Brittany's DNA on it. Authorities couldn't believe it, recognizing that if the photo had been taken at even a slightly different angle, this key piece of evidence would likely never have been linked to Cheyenne. It was still a complex case to build. They had no motive and Cheyenne wasn't giving them anything. Months became years, and it was now almost 2 years since Brittany had died. Finally, they got a tip from someone who hadn't yet spoken up. A friend of Cheyenne's had turned up at Brittany's parents' house with a shocking story. She said that Cheyenne had come to her house that very morning sometime after 5 a.m. She was very drunk and sobbing, and the friend described it as an alcohol-fueled rant. Cheyenne said that she and Brittany had gotten into what she described as a heated argument, something over a cell phone, but she didn't elaborate. Hysterically crying and shaking, Cheyenne said she had hit and choked Brittany to death with her belt. She pointed to something outside, and as the friend looked out, she saw Brittany's car parked up, with Brittany slumped against the window in the passenger seat, bleeding. Cheyenne didn't speak any more about the fight, what had caused it, or how it had escalated, but she made no mention of anyone else being there or a motel. Her friend was so shaken up she told Cheyenne to leave immediately, and she got back in the car and drunkenly sped off. But once Cheyenne sobered up the next morning, the friend said she had claimed she couldn't remember anything that had happened that night and had seemingly forgotten everything. The friend was too scared to report this to the police, but as time ticked by, they decided to give the information to the family. Cheyenne's uncle also later admitted she had asked him to go along with her story, and he had given her several false alibis. Police said that she had manipulated the story, made up random people, used her uncle, posted lies to Facebook, and spent 2 years taking no responsibility. If she felt as bad as she said over what she had done, she could have taken Brittany to hospital. Instead, she left her to die. In March 2017, Cheyenne Antoine was charged with second-degree murder and causing indignity to her body. With all the evidence against her, Cheyenne told them the same story she had told her friend that early morning. They were drinking and smoking a lot, and Cheyenne said after the house party is where her memory started to go. She said she vaguely remembered going to a McDonald's where the pair started arguing. They left and started walking when Brittany grabbed Cheyenne's phone. Cheyenne said she couldn't really remember how it had happened, but she remembered being livid and snapping. Everything went hazy, and suddenly, Brittany was unconscious on the ground. At the age of 21, she finally appeared in court and faced Brittany's family for the first time. Cheyenne buried her head in her hands, crying and not looking at anyone. Under Canadian law, second-degree murder is generally a deliberate killing that occurs without planning but does not fall under any of the categories of first-degree murder. It can still carry a hefty sentence, however, with the minimum term starting at life in prison with 10 years to serve. Manslaughter is homicide committed without intent. Although there may have been an intention to cause harm, this carries no minimum sentence. Knowing this, Cheyenne's legal team announced that she was cutting a deal. She pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter, rather than go through a trial for second-degree murder. She said she would take responsibility for Brittany's death but had no memory of it. Therefore, manslaughter was appropriate. Through her lawyer she said, "I will never forgive myself. Nothing I say or do will ever bring her back. I am very, very sorry. It shouldn't have ever happened." Her lawyer asked for sympathy considering the years of trauma her client had gone through. She didn't really have a relationship with her parents, had lost her mother young, and had a criminal record from the age of just 12 years old, racking up 54 convictions by the age of 19. Her memories of her parents were of them abusing drugs to escape the trauma that they had experienced as a result of Canada's infamous residential school system. Cheyenne had moved in with foster parents who had physically and sexually abused her, and her lawyer said she was sexually assaulted a month prior to Brittany's murder, which had significantly increased her drug and alcohol use. She was now using much harder substances like meth. But people said it had to be noted that as awful as everything she had suffered through was, Brittany was somebody that had been there for her through thick and thin, helping her manage her feelings, regulate her emotions, and always being a shoulder to cry on. Brittany had been the one constant and support system in her life, the one person she always knew she could turn to. She would have done anything for her. She knows the family would like an explanation, a reason, but unfortunately she can't provide that, Cheyenne's lawyer said. Police and prosecutors say Cheyenne mentioned a cell phone potentially being the cause of the fight, but they know little else. Cheyenne has never said anything else about it, and whether she remembers or not, has blocked it out, or is intentionally keeping quiet, is still unknown. It will likely always be this way. 21-year-old Cheyenne was later sentenced to 7 years in prison, with a likely release date of 2024 or 2025. The judge said she needed to work a program in prison to help her with her addiction and anger. Honor your friend by becoming a positive, productive woman. You owe it to her to persevere, she said. There are still so many questions about what happened that night and why it ever did. One person claims they can't remember and the other can't talk at all. Brittany's aunt described the pain of losing a niece as profoundly dark and intense, and Christy, her stepmother, said Brittany's little sister feels guilty if a day goes by where she doesn't think about Brittany. She was just 5 years old at the time of her death and says she's worried that if she doesn't think about her, it means she's forgetting her. Brittany's father Everett said, "I feel so much anger and sadness about how short her life was. My life changed forever. I miss her so much." The day before she was killed, he was supposed to help fix something with her car, but he couldn't make it back in time. He said he thinks of this every day, knowing it could have been just one last time to hug her, and he was robbed of that. If you're enjoying these documentaries and would like to support the channel, I'd truly appreciate it. Creating these videos takes a lot of time and effort. If you'd like to help me keep bringing you high-quality true crime content, you can now send a gift through YouTube. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Every subscriber brings us one step closer to monetization and helps me create even better documentaries for you. Whether you send a gift, subscribe, or simply keep watching and sharing these videos, your support means more than you know. Thank you for watching, and let's continue to the next case. Dominique Ellen Dunn was born on November 23, 1959, in Santa Monica, California. She was the youngest child of Ellen, known to most as Lenny, a ranching heiress, and Dominique, who was a writer, actor, and producer. Her parents were divorced just a few years after Dominique was born but remained great friends, and Dominique stayed incredibly close to both of them. Her family had a lot of ties to the entertainment industry, and it came as no surprise when Dominique took an interest in performing herself. After graduating and taking time to travel, she began studying acting and booked roles in well-known stage shows, including West Side Story, The Mousetrap, and My Three Angels. Within weeks of moving to Hollywood, she landed her first big role in the 1979 television film Diary of a Teenage Hitchhiker. She then went on to get supporting roles in various episodes of popular 80s television series such as Fame, Family, and Heart to Heart. She booked a recurring role in the comedy television drama series Breaking Away, and went on to appear in several other television films. Her career was starting to thrive. By 1981, she had quite an extensive acting resume, and this led to her being cast in her first big feature film, the supernatural horror hit Poltergeist, playing Dana Freeling. The film went on to become a sensation and grossed over $70 million at the box office. The role cemented her place in pop culture, and she quickly became a well-known face with a lot of acting work being sent her way. After the success of Poltergeist, she was cast as Robin Maxwell in a pilot episode for the TV miniseries V. Tragically, she would never complete filming on the highly anticipated show. Dominique's versatility and capabilities as an actress were apparent very early on. Steven Spielberg, the producer of Poltergeist who worked very closely with her, said of Dominique that she was a treasure of natural ability. In 1981, Dominique met a sous chef named John Thomas Sweeney at a private party. 7 years her senior, Sweeney was an established chef and worked at Mar Maison, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Los Angeles, which was frequented by many famous faces. Sweeney's upbringing couldn't have been further from that of Dominique's. His father was an unemployed alcoholic who frequently beat his mother, and his mother worked as a waitress trying to support her family as best she could. When Sweeney was 14, his parents divorced, and he set about making plans to move out of Pennsylvania and start a new life. He focused on being a chef and said that this dream was his ticket out of his old life. A matter of weeks after the pair met, they moved into a one-bedroom West Hollywood home together. However, the relationship quickly began to deteriorate due to Sweeney's jealous and controlling behavior. He stopped her from seeing friends and frequently tried to get her to quit her flourishing career in a bid to prevent her from meeting new people. The couple rode and fought frequently, and it wasn't long before Sweeney became physically abusive. Dominique appeared in an episode of Hill Street Blues, playing a teenage mother who was the victim of parental abuse. The makeup team applied nothing to her face, as shockingly, all of the cuts and bruises were real and had been caused by Sweeney in the days before the shoot. Her family, although polite and welcoming towards Sweeney, felt uncomfortable in his presence. They all commented on the fact that it was very obvious that Sweeney was far more obsessed with the relationship than Dominique was. Her mother Ellen would later recall the first time she realized her daughter was in grave danger. She said, "She came over here one night and she was weeping. She said, 'Oh, Sweeney has such a terrible temper. He smashes furniture and throws dishes.' And I said, 'Dominique, that is frightening.' I've never forgotten her answer. She said, 'Oh, he'd never hurt me.'" According to a source, in August 1982, Sweeney pulled handfuls of her hair out by the roots. Dominique ran to her mother's house trying to escape, and Ellen found her curled up on the floor in the fetal position, cradling her head. Sweeney followed her to the house and started banging on the doors and windows, demanding they let him in. A few days later, however, Dominique returned to the home she shared with Sweeney, and the pair resumed their relationship. During another fight on September 26, 1982, Sweeney grabbed Dominique by the throat and threw her to the floor. He then proceeded to strangle her. A friend who was staying with the couple heard what he described as loud gagging sounds. He ran into the room where he saw Dominique being attacked. Sweeney denied any wrongdoing and told Dominique to come back to bed, seemingly playing it off as one big misunderstanding. Dominique snuck out of the bedroom window and ran to her car. When Sweeney heard her start the engine, he chased her down and jumped on the car bonnet. She turned the engine off until Sweeney got down from the hood, and as soon as he did this, she sped off into the night. She stayed at the home of a friend for the next few days, and her mother stayed with her too. After this terrifying incident, she phoned Sweeney and ended the relationship. He moved out of the house they shared, and Dominique had the locks changed before she moved back in herself. Tragically, a little over a month later, Dominique Dunn would be dead. On October 30th, 1982, just a few weeks after the pair had ended their relationship, Dominique was rehearsing for her latest project, V, at her West Hollywood home. She was running lines alongside actor David Packer. Dominique took a break to talk with a friend on the phone when she suddenly realized the phone call had been broken into. Sweeney had got the operator to break into the conversation to listen to her, and Dominique said to her friend, "Oh God, it's Sweeney. Let me get him off the phone." At around 9 p.m., Dominique and David heard a loud banging at the front door. Sweeney had been drinking martinis at the Mar Maison bar and decided to walk to the house. Sweeney refused to leave unless Dominique came out to talk to him, so she headed out, leaving David Packer inside, and went to speak with Sweeney through the locked door. After a few minutes, she agreed to talk to him on the porch. It wasn't long before an argument between the two began. David Packer recalled hearing smacking sounds followed by 2 screams and then a thudding sound. He phoned the police straight away but was diverted to the wrong police area. He was told that Dominique's house was outside of that particular department's jurisdiction. Packer then phoned a friend and warned him that if he was found dead, John Sweeney would be his killer. Packer left the home through the back door and headed for the driveway, where he saw Sweeney kneeling over Dominique's body by some bushes. Sweeney told David Packer to call the police. Fortunately, this call did connect properly, and when the police arrived, Sweeney put his hands in the air and said, "I killed my girlfriend and I tried to kill myself." Dominique was unconscious and transported to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, where she was instantly placed on life support. She remained in a deep coma, and scans showed that she had no brain activity due to oxygen deprivation. When her father Dominic was allowed to see his daughter, he was met with an agonizing sight. Dominique's eyes were wide open, her head had been shaved, and she had a screw in her skull to relieve pressure on her brain. Dominic could see the strangle marks on her neck. Sweeney testified to police that while he remembered arguing with Dominique, he couldn't remember what had happened that led him to attacking her. He said after the verbal argument, all he could recall was being on top of her with his hands around her neck. He said he just exploded and lunged towards her. John Sweeney was immediately arrested and charged with attempted murder. 5 days later, on November 4th, her parents made the unbearably painful decision to consent to her being taken off life support, and Dominique was pronounced dead. It was just weeks before she would turn 23 years old. Her mother Ellen requested that Dominique's kidneys and heart be donated to transplant centers. Her kidneys were donated to 2 people who were at the hospital at the same time as her, and her heart was sent to a hospital in San Francisco. The family all agreed that this is what Dominique would have wanted, to help save someone else's life. Dominique's funeral was held 2 days later at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills. The funeral was packed. As well as friends and family, celebrities had turned up to pay their respects too. She was laid to rest near her Poltergeist co-star Heather O'Rourke, who had lost her life aged just 12 years old, and actress Natalie Wood, who was a good friend of Ellen and one of Dominique's heroes. After Dominique died, Sweeney was charged with first-degree murder, which he pled not guilty to. He was also charged with assault with intent to do great bodily harm and was held on $150,000 bail. Dominique's appearance in the episode of Hill Street Blues aired on November 18, 1982, just 2 weeks after her death. The episode was dedicated to her in the opening credits. Sweeney's trial began in August of 1983 and was presided over by Judge Burton S. Katz. Little did anyone know this would go down in history as one of the most controversial trials. Sweeney took the stand in his own defense. Patrick Terrell, the owner of Marmaison, described Sweeney as a very dependable young man and said he would personally obtain the best legal representation he could for him. However, Sweeney was given a court-appointed attorney named Michael Adelson, a criminal defense attorney who was notoriously tough. During the trial, Sweeney said that when he had turned up at Dominique's home that day, they had worked things out and were going to start afresh. He claimed that they were planning on moving back in together and there were even talks of marriage and children. He claimed that on the night of October 30th, Dominique Dunn had abruptly changed her mind about resuming the relationship and that she had been lying to him and leading him on. At that point, Sweeney said he exploded and lunged at her. He still maintained that he had no recollection of attacking her but stopped when he realized that she was no longer breathing. Sweeney said he had attempted to revive her by making her walk around the driveway, but she soon fell onto the floor. He then claimed he had tried to give her CPR, which caused her to vomit. Sweeney said that he too had vomited and ran inside the house and consumed 2 whole bottles of pills in an attempt to take his own life. The police disputed this and said there was no evidence to suggest this had actually happened. Sweeney said he then went back out to the driveway where Dominique was lying and lay down beside her. He said he had tried to help by pulling her tongue out of her throat, something he said he used to do for his epileptic father. Michael Adelson said that Sweeney's actions were not premeditated and that he had acted out of a crime of passion, which was provoked by Dominique's alleged lies about a reconciliation. Dominique's family strenuously denied these claims and said that she was well and truly done with their relationship. A letter written by Dominique addressed to Sweeney was read out. It said, "The whole thing has made me realize how scared I am of you, and I don't just mean physically. I'm afraid of the next time you are going to have another mood swing." Deputy Frank DiMiglio was the first officer to arrive on scene, and he testified that Sweeney said to him, "Man, I blew it. Killed her. I didn't think I choked her that hard. But I don't know. I just kept on choking her. I just lost my temper and blew it again." The medical examiner determined that she had been strangled for at least 3 minutes. Police and prosecutors quickly dismissed the heat of passion defense, as they believed that given the fact she was choked for at least 3 minutes, this left a lot of time for Sweeney to regain control of himself and stop what he was doing. But instead, he continued to carry out the vicious and prolonged attack. The prosecution called one of Sweeney's ex-girlfriends, Lillian Pierce, to the stand. At the request of Sweeney's legal team, Lillian did not testify in the jury's presence. Michael Adelson requested that Judge Katz rule her testimony inadmissible, as it was, in his words, prejudicial. Judge Katz granted this request, and the jury would never learn of Lillian's statements. Lillian said that she and Sweeney had dated on and off for around 3 years, and that he had assaulted her on 10 occasions. She said she had been hospitalized twice for her severe injuries. During one of these attacks, Lillian sustained a perforated eardrum, a collapsed lung, and a broken nose. During her testimony, Sweeney became so angry, he jumped up from his seat and ran towards the door leading into the judge's chambers. He had to be subdued by 2 court bailiffs and 4 armed guards. After this outburst, they were forced to handcuff him to his chair. Through tears, he apologized, and Judge Katz accepted his words and moved on with the trial. Although Sweeney frequently cried, resulting in the trial being postponed until he was calm again, the Dunn family were told to show no emotion. At the behest of Adelson, Judge Katz stated that as well as Lillian's testimony, he refused to allow testimonies from both Dominique's friends and her mother Ellen. He ruled their statements about Sweeney's abuse as nothing more than hearsay. It was one devastating blow after another for Dominique's friends and family. Michael Adelson requested that Judge Katz rule that the evidence presented was insufficient to prove first-degree murder, as there was no proof of predetermination. Judge Katz granted this request and instructed jurors they were only allowed to consider charges of either manslaughter or second-degree murder. Dominique's family were devastated. On September 21, 1983, after an arduous 8 days of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. Sweeney was sat with his hands clasped around a Bible and nodded towards the jury as the verdict was read out. When Judge Katz told the jury they could leave as justice had been served, Dominique's father shouted, "Not for our family." Dominique accused Judge Katz of purposely withholding Lillian's testimony from the jury, which could have helped establish Sweeney's incredibly violent history with women. Media outlets quickly picked up on the outcome, and Judge Katz received immense criticism for his handling of the trial. People felt that his rulings always clearly favored the defense, and a victims' rights group founded by actress Teresa Saldana called Victims for Victims marched outside the courtroom in protest. A local Los Angeles TV station did a poll which saw Judge Katz voted 4th worst judge in Los Angeles County. In November, Sweeney was sentenced. He received 6 years in prison, which was the maximum penalty possible for the charge, and he would only serve 3.5 of those years. Dominique spoke at length about the trial and his feelings towards Judge Katz. He said, "Our family has never favored Judge Katz's charms, not even to the point of simple courtesies. For 7 weeks, he mispronounced Dominique's name, insistently calling her by my name, Dominique. People wandered in and out of the courtroom. Lawyers for other cases chatted with the clerk or used the bailiff's telephone. At the sentencing, in a shock twist, Judge Katz actually criticized the jury's ruling of manslaughter, claiming he didn't agree with it. Katz stated he felt Dominique's death was a case pure and simple of murder with malice. He went on to say, "I am convinced that John Sweeney did not kill Dominique Dunn in the heat of passion, but rather that he killed her because his ego could not stand rejection." The jury's foreman, Paul Spiegel, told the media that he and other jurors were shocked by the criticism from Katz and referred to his comments as a cheap shot. Spiegel felt that the criticism did not stem from the verdict itself but came off the back of the criticism that Katz himself had received from the media and the public. Spiegel also went on to say that had the jury heard all the evidence and been presented with everything, they would have convicted John Sweeney of the murder of Dominique Dunn. A year after Dominique's murder, her mother Ellen founded Justice for Homicide Victims, a victims' rights organization. Her work with this would see her recognized by President George H.W. Bush. Dominique's father also threw himself into work and activism. He started keeping a journal during the trial, and those writings were published in a March 1984 issue of Vanity Fair. It was titled Justice, a father's account of the trial of his daughter's killer. After this, Dominique began covering and reporting on many high-profile cases, such as the Menendez brothers and O.J. Simpson. Dominique said of Sweeney that, "Maybe the law will let him go. I'm not going to let him go." And Dominique stayed true to his word. After his release from prison in 1987, Sweeney went straight back into working as a chef and was hired by the Chronicle, an upscale restaurant in Santa Monica. This job would not last long, however. Dominique's family started handing out flyers that said, "The food you ate tonight was cooked by the hands that killed Dominique Dunn." As the protest showed no sign of stopping, Sweeney left the Chronicle and fled the Los Angeles area. It wasn't until the mid-90s that the Dunn family would hear Sweeney's name again. Dominique was contacted by a doctor in Florida who had read his article in Vanity Fair. The doctor said that his daughter had gotten engaged to a chef named John Sweeney and wanted to know if it was the same man, which it was. Dominique's brother Griffin contacted the woman in an attempt to get her to break off the engagement. After this, Sweeney moved away from the area again, claiming he was being harassed. He changed his name to John Moore. Dominic Dunn admitted to having Sweeney followed and tracked and talked to this freely on an episode of CNN's Larry King Live. He said that the utter injustice of Sweeney's sentence drove him almost crazy. He spoke about a woman who was now in her 80s and who had been a member of the jury during Sweeney's trial. She had written to him expressing how sorry she was and that the verdict was bothering her and she needed to clear it up before she died. Dominic was incredibly touched by her words. After many years, her father said he didn't want to waste his life filled with anger and that he no longer wanted to spend every waking moment keeping tabs on Sweeney. The last that appears to be publicly known about John Moore is that he was residing in San Rafael, California, working as the director of food services for Smith Ranch Homes, a retirement community. Dominic's family worked tirelessly to keep her name and memory alive and to draw as much attention to their daughter's case as possible. Her brother Griffin still works with the Justice for Homicide Victims group. Her family's activism and constant fight for justice will never be forgotten. Dominique Dunn was a bright, gifted, and warm-hearted 22-year-old. She was at the beginning of her life and undoubtedly had so much more to give and achieve. 19-year-old Maple Padalia was born near Mumbai in India before moving to Surrey in British Columbia with her family shortly after. Friends said she was warm and intelligent, ambitious and determined. A straight-A student with dreams of being a doctor. She was also very creative and was starting to make waves in the entertainment industry. As well as studying health and science, she was often picking up modeling and acting gigs. She landed a role in the 2010 movie Diary of a Wimpy Kid and filmed an episode of The Secret Circle which was airing on the CW. She was already signed to a modeling agency and was over the moon when she found out she was a finalist in the Central City model search. The head of her agency said she was super intelligent, very articulate, very focused, and probably one of the most likable individuals you could ever meet. She had gained a place at Simon Fraser University and lived at home with her family and commuted. She hoped to go to medical school after she finished. But she also told friends she was enjoying riding the acting wave so much she didn't want to rule this out as a long-term career. Safe to say for someone so young. She was busy, but embracing all the challenges and opportunities that were coming her way and balancing them all well. Mabel had been in a 4-year, off-and-on relationship with 20-year-old Gajinder Dhaliwal, known to everyone as Gary. But their relationship finally came to an end in 2011 when Maple found out he had cheated on her. She was heartbroken about the betrayal, but she had enough to keep her busy, throwing herself into her work and her all-important studies. On the evening of September 27, 2011, Maple left her family home and headed to the campus library with a friend. They had a late-night study session planned and met up with a few more people there as well. As the hours ticked by into the next morning, they all decided to call it day. Maple hugged her friends goodbye and headed to her car, which was on the 3rd floor of the parking lot. Just minutes after 1 a.m., a resident across the street suddenly heard 7 loud bangs in quick succession. He ran to his window to see a white Dodge Charger screeching away. More people came running out onto the street, calling 911 as they did. Maple was lying on the ground near her car, surrounded by blood. She had been shot 5 times, 3 of which hit her in the stomach, and her head was covered in stab wounds and cut marks. A large bloody kitchen knife was lying nearby. She was still alive, but only just. Authorities, who had received dozens of calls about the gunshots already, were on scene within minutes. They worked on Maple long enough to make sure she was stable, and she was finally rushed to the local hospital. But her injuries were proved too severe and she died just a few hours later. It was such a frenzied attack made even more shocking as it happened in such an open, public, and despite the time of day, still fairly busy place. It was obvious from the cameras around the campus that many students were doing exactly the same thing as Maple that night. But despite how many people were around, there wasn't a single witness on the 3rd floor of the parking complex. The fear swept through the university campus, and the following day, 50 officers were working on the case. Investigators were keeping their cards close to their chest, although they didn't have as many as they would have liked. They said they didn't know if the attack was random or targeted. Maple's wallet had been found next to her and nothing had been taken, which seemed to rule a robbery out. They also said it seemed unlikely that the shooting was linked to gang violence, but they couldn't say anything with absolute certainty. They tried to reassure the students that they were still safe on campus, with one detective saying, "Other than the fact this homicide appears to have occurred adjacent to the Simon Fraser campus, we don't feel that the student body and leadership of the Simon Fraser University campus needs to be unduly alarmed." With his eyes filled with tears, The university spokesperson said they were making counseling available for anyone who felt they needed it and for as long as they did so. Vigils were held and the community grieved together. Maple's family said they could only think of one person that would have any reason to harm her. Her ex-boyfriend, 20-year-old Gary. But to go as far as to kill her, it was a lot for them to contemplate. Being on and off since high school, the young couple had had their fair share of issues, but after their relationship came to its final end in the fall of 2011, Gary's behavior took an especially dark turn. Her family told police that a scary pattern of stalking and harassment had started. Between mid-August and late September of 2011, Gary made more than 2,000 calls to Maple and texted her even more than that. On one night when she was out at a club with a friend, he sent a total of 300 text messages. He started following her and having his friends follow her, keeping tabs on where she was and who she was with. He spat on one of Maple's friends outside a club and punched another one of her friends after he found out he and Maple were having coffee. After Maple tried to intervene, he pushed her to the floor. She called the police. He was arrested and ordered not to have any contact with her and was charged with assault. The friend he had punched was one of the friends that had been with Maple in the library that night. But with no witnesses and currently no evidence to suggest he was on campus that night, police had little to go on. But they did have one crucial piece of evidence. The resident that looked out of his window had got a perfect description of what they believed was the getaway car. He saw it speeding away at around 1:04 a.m. and he could tell them what street he saw it on too. Although the number plate could not be made out, they were able to work backwards using the cameras, and fortunately the university was well covered with almost 100 cameras and they were pretty good quality too. They started releasing parts of the footage and asking those on the tapes to come forward with anything they had, no matter how small. Looking at the rest of the videos, detectives could easily spot Maple in the library with her friends, smiling and laughing as she worked. But it didn't seem that anyone was watching or following her, and Maple appeared comfortable with where she was and who she was with. Just before 1 a.m., Maple and her 3 friends left the library together. Although there was no audio, everything still looked fine, and Maple seemed content walking with them. Staff at the university were able to identify everyone she was with that night, and they all voluntarily gave statements. Officers were happy to rule them all out as being involved. It seemed they had all parted ways, just minutes before she was shot. The camera on the 3rd floor parking lot was on a timer and set to pan around the whole area every couple of minutes and, frustratingly, just as Maple entered the floor, the camera cut away from the entrance and they could see nothing. They could see the same white car had entered the parking lot just after 8 p.m. It circled around for ages before parking up, and as it finally did, Maple and her friend entered the frame. It was obvious that whoever was in the car was aware that Maple would be there that evening and was tracking her every move. This was not someone who happened to be there at the same time and took the opportunity. This was a carefully and meticulously planned murder. It was now 2012, and officers were still diligently working on Maple's case. They just didn't have enough to make any arrests. For months, the team took on the painstaking task of cross-referencing everyone that owned or had rented the same make or model of car in the area, interviewing and slowly ruling people out. Finally, in late 2012, they made a connection. The name Gursamar Beatty was linked to one of the cars. He was a close friend of Gary's, and a fellow student at the university. He had rented a white Dodge Charger on September 25, 2011, and returned it shortly after the 28th. When he picked the car up, he was with none other than Gary. 21-year-old Gursamar had also put the vehicle through a car wash within the hours after Maple was shot. Police managed to track down the car, and despite the cleaning, they found a shell casing under the hood that matched the shells found at the scene. On December 1, 2012, over a year since Maple was killed, authorities announced that they had made not 1, but 2 arrests. Maple's ex-boyfriend Gary was charged with first-degree murder, and his friend Gursamar was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and being an accessory after the fact. Gursamar had followed Maple's car for days before the murder, helped Gary flee the scene, put the vehicle through the car wash, and gave him an alibi for months. The gun used in the murder was never found. Gary was furious that Maple was moving on without him, socializing and having many a success come her way. Her life did not include him anymore. And for someone who was already jealous, insecure, and possessive, he felt if he couldn't have her, then no one could. Her family said he felt he could impose the relationship on her and take away the choice for her to want to leave, ultimately taking her life in the process. And before the trial was set to start in 2016, the now 26-year-old Gary would change his plea. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 21 years. The judge could choose a period between 10 and 25 years, and the prosecutor said it's probably the highest sentence given to someone convicted of killing one person as opposed to many people. 27-year-old Jursumer Beatty was later found not guilty of second-degree murder, but he was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact. He was sentenced to 22 months in prison, but 6 months before his sentence's scheduled end, he was released early. Maple's sister said, "That 18-month sentence was a slap in my family's face. He had the audacity to stay quiet. Even when the sentencing happened, he smirked at our family. He smirked at the people there in a way to imply that I got away with this." It took 5 years to get any form of justice for Maple and her family, and the devastating aftermath caused by her death is still felt in the Surrey area today. A documentary about Maple was released in 2017, which went on to win several awards at major festivals. The director Jocelyn Kaur wanted the film to serve as a memorial to her, but also as a way of shedding light on domestic violence. The Maple Badalia Memorial Scholarship for the Arts was set up and provides one annual entrance to a South Asian Canadian female student beginning their journey in the world of art and design. 19-year-old Maple was already achieving so much, and with her determination and drive, there is no doubt she would have gone on to do many more amazing things in whatever career path she chose. One of Maple's friends reiterated this and described her death as like stomping on a flower before it bloomed. Her dad called her his most precious jewel, and said his life feels completely useless now. "We're left with nothing," he said. "We lost our angel and she's not going to come back." He said even though Maple was the baby of the family, she was always the glue that held everyone together. The case of Jordan Worth, a sadist with an angelic face. Statistics on victims of domestic violence are not just difficult to keep, but virtually impossible because many people simply do not seek help, not wanting to make a fool of themselves, so to speak. Sometimes people endure years of abuse, beatings, and humiliation, and some facts are revealed only when the irreparable happens. Simply put, these statistics are often based on dead bodies. The case of a young English woman named Jordan Worth made headlines across the country in 2018 and was in many ways, if not unique, then at least special. First, this fragile person with an angelic appearance destroyed the stereotype that cruel tyrants and abusers in relationships are men because they are trivially stronger physically. And secondly, she became the first woman in British history to receive a real prison sentence for domestic violence and coercive control because previously on such charges, only men were imprisoned. Fortunately, tragedy was avoided in this story, but the very fact that a young woman and mother of 2 children almost tortured to death, the father of her heirs, causes at the very least bewilderment. And now let's understand how in principle such a situation could develop and why Worth's chosen one. Alex Skeel tolerated inhuman treatment for so long and did not go to the police, even when his life was in real danger. Before he met Jordan Worth, Alexander was born in 1995, August 17th, in a town called Kingston upon Hull in a fairly well-to-do, friendly, and loving family. He and his twin brother were welcome and long-awaited children, but they were born much earlier than expected, because of which doctors seriously feared for them and did not make any prognosis. Spent the first months of their lives in the hospital in special chambers for premature babies with critically low body weight. But thanks to the efforts of experienced doctors, the children soon recovered. True, Alexander's brother gained weight faster, and by the first birthday, he had practically no traces and consequences of prematurity. Alex himself turned out to be weaker. Moreover, he suffered from excessive accumulation of fluid in the brain, hydrocephalus, because of which he received a disability. Nevertheless, Alexander's health problems from birth did not affect his intellectual development, and physically, he was not much different from his peers, and even actively engaged in sports at school. Spouses Skeel adored their sons. From infancy surrounded them with love and care, as well as spared no effort and money to give them a good education and provide a better life. After graduating from high school, both brothers entered the prestigious Bedford College, where they continued their studies. Alexander was smart enough, had an attractive appearance, tried to regularly attend the gym, and in general enjoyed success with the opposite sex, except that unlike his brother, who willingly went on dates and had affairs, he was quite shy and more focused on his studies. A love at first sight. It was in college that Alex met a young beauty named Jordan Worth. The girl was his age. She grew up in a wealthy family, and from a young age she knew almost nothing to refuse. She dressed beautifully and expensively, carefully watched her appearance, and led an active social life. Jordan was considered one of the most popular girls in college, which tried to court many guys. In addition, she, in parallel with her studies, worked as a volunteer, raising funds and organizing assistance to local shelters for homeless animals. as well as starving children in Africa. Worth was even repeatedly recognized for her efforts and for trying to make the world a better place. At first glance, this girl seemed a real angel in the flesh, kind, sympathetic, in addition, intelligent and beautiful. Alexander fell in love with her at first sight, but at first thought that bright and popular Jordan will not even pay attention to him. However, as it turned out, he also immediately appealed to her, and she herself became the initiator of their acquaintance. Worth was much more experienced in amorous affairs, but for modest skill, she was the very first love of his life. Young people in love spent a lot of time together and were practically inseparable. In college, they were called the most beautiful couple, which was very flattering to Jordan. The first 6 months of the relationship were filled with love, romance, and mutual respect. Students tried to make each other pleasant surprises, gave cute gifts on small, but already so important for them dates. In their accounts in social networks, daily appeared joint photos on which they were happy together. The pictures were accompanied by touching captions and declarations of love. From the outside, it seemed that these two were simply made for each other, and a long and happy life was ahead of them. Quite quickly, the young people decided to live together and rented an apartment. Since they were both still students, significant financial assistance was provided by their parents, who, by the way, were not against the relationship of the couple. Jordan even liked Alexander's parents because she seemed to be a serious girl, planned to become a teacher of art history, and in general made a positive impression on others. However, time passed and Worth's behavior began to change. It all started with increased control, which increased with each month of their life together. Woman demanded from her young man to report to her every step, unapologetically checked his personal correspondence in the phone, email, as well as social networks, arranged wild scenes of jealousy literally in the same place and without any reason. Alexander tried not to pay attention to this because he was in love and such behavior of his passions did not bother him too much. Even when the beloved began to choose his own clothes, forcing him to wear only what she buys, the guy wrote it off as care on her part. Soon, the woman began to limit the circle of socialization of her boyfriend. Jordan herself chose with whom and when he can see and with whom he can no longer keep in touch. Under the separation fell not only friends and fellow students of Skill, but also members of his family. As Worth got away with it, her boyfriend never complained to anyone, and they continued to look like a happy, perfect couple in public and on social media. The young lady began literally to revel in her impunity. She deleted contacts from Alexander's phone, without his knowledge blocked his family and friends, and even responded to messages on his behalf, often in a rude and insulting form. And after Jordan erased the correspondence so that the guy did not even know what he said to people, from which they no longer wanted to communicate with him. The last straw and the breakup. The first alarm was raised by Alexander's twin brother when Jordan began to prevent their communication. By that time, the parents of the brothers also noticed that Alex distanced himself from the family and his beloved and at all began to avoid them, refusing to come to visit even on holidays and not wanting to communicate even on the phone. And on all attempts to get in touch with her, the woman was frankly rude. In those rare moments when the mother was able to get through to her son, she asked him to leave his chosen one, warning that nothing good will come out of this affair. But the young man in love did not want to listen to anyone and defended his girlfriend, claiming that she just so takes care of him and does not wish anyone anything bad. Soon the Skill family became aware that Worth forced their son to drop out of college, leave sports, and get a job. At the same time, the woman took away from her lover all the money he earned and spent it on his own needs and entertainment. Then the parents again made an attempt to talk to their son and convince him to leave Jordan, but their efforts were again unsuccessful. In 2013, during the celebration of his adulthood, committed a disgusting act, which she got away with. On that day, she and her friends celebrated the solemn event in a country hotel, and at some point closer to the night, when the guests have already begun to disperse, the woman, without saying anything to anyone, simply disappeared. Alexander literally went crazy trying to find his beloved and worried that something might have happened to her. She returned to their room in the morning, being in a state of strong alcoholic intoxication. And when the guy tried to find out where she was, she just attacked him with fists and insults and then laughed and said that she was going to report to him. 2 months later, while celebrating Alexander's own 18th birthday, Jordan got into a fight in front of her boyfriend's family and friends. She beat up a 15-year-old girl neighbor, whom the Skill family knew well and had invited to the family party. Worth thought the woman was talking too sweetly to Alex, so she attacked her, pulling her hair and scratching her face. Jordan was barely calmed down, but it was clear to everyone what she was really like. After that, Parents and brother insisted that Alexander broke up with the girl, who behaved so aggressively and inadequately. Surprisingly, but the guy listened to them for the first time and agreed that his chosen one overreacted. The same evening he talked to her and said that he would not return to their apartment, but would stay to live in his parents' house. The reunion and the birth of their shared children. It's been almost 6 months since the couple broke up. Alex returned to his studies but continued to work. He almost no longer thought about Jordan. When on the eve of New Year's Eve, 2014, she unexpectedly called and informed him that she was pregnant and in the spring they would become parents. Was surprised and delighted with such news, and the woman apologized to him and said that she had not informed him earlier because she was sure that he did not want to see her anymore. The parents of the guy, having learned that they will soon have a grandchild, also melted and themselves offered the woman to move into their house. Worth agreed and moved into the Skeel family home. She officially married the father of her child, and 3 months later, she and Alexander had a common son, William. The young parents and grandparents were unspeakably happy, and until about mid-fall 2014, they lived amicably and quietly. It was a short period when Jordan really cared about her chosen one, tried in every possible way to please him, and fell in love with the guy anew. When William was 6 months old, it turned out that the girl was pregnant again. At this time, she again became capricious and hysterical and demanded from Alexander that they immediately move out of his parents' house. Such behavior on raging hormones, but agreed to rent them housing in the city, where they soon moved. In the summer of 2015, the couple had a second common child, a girl to whom they gave the name Alice. Alexander was absolutely happy and literally carried his wife and children in his arms. But Jordan, finally convinced that the chosen one will not go anywhere from her now, showed the darkest corners of her soul. The turning point. Worth again forbade her husband to communicate with his family and did not let his parents see their grandchildren. At the same time, the woman willingly accepted from them financial assistance and sometimes even made Alex himself to ask his parents for money. In just a few months, she completely subjugated his will, breaking him psychologically and took his life under her total control. Jordan regularly humiliated and insulted her husband, and at one point, she started hitting him. At first, not violently, as if testing how he would react, how he would behave. And when the woman realized that her husband would tolerate everything, would not tell anyone, and nothing would happen to her for this, she gave free rein to her cruelty, displaying sophisticated, sadistic tendencies towards him. It all started when they started renovating their house, and the woman was constantly dissatisfied with everything Alexander did. He carelessly noted that it was simply impossible to please her, after which a hammer flew into his head, leaving a deep wound. The bewildered guy fell down and almost lost consciousness. Clasping the wound with his hand, he felt blood running down his face. Then he asked his wife to help him or call an ambulance, to which she indifferently replied, "Crawl away somewhere and die," and then just went into another room to watch TV. Alex treated the head himself, didn't go to a doctor, and didn't say anything to anyone. From that moment on, Jordan was convinced that whatever she did, she could get away with it, and her husband would never complain to anyone and certainly would not go to the hospital or the police. The next 3 years of his life turned out to be incessant moral and physical torture for Alexander. But he himself was already so depressed that he did not feel it and did not even feel the threat hanging over him. He continued to work, tried to provide his family with everything they needed, but he became increasingly irritated and discontented with his wife, who now not only beat him every day, but also invented more and more sophisticated abuse. Now the young man was forbidden to sleep on the matrimonial bed, and instead he was confined to the floor on the bedside mat without a blanket or pillow like a dog. He was also forbidden to enter the kitchen, and he could only eat what his wife and children did not finish. In fact, Alexander was starving because he could not buy anything outside the house because Jordan took away all his money. In addition, the woman deprived her husband of sleep and rest, having invented a new entertainment for herself. As soon as he fell asleep, she would beat him on the head, cut him, or pour boiling water on him. Skeel later recalled waking up each time in savage pain, bloody, or burned. After that, he would go to treat and bandage his wounds with improvised means, and his wife would go to bed quietly. Alexander perceived what was happening as something ordinary. He was finally broken morally and did not try to resist. The man completely stopped communicating with his parents and brother, and his wife on his behalf regularly asked them for money. Also financially helped them her parents so that the young woman could not deny herself anything. Skeel lost a lot of weight and weighed already less than 50 pounds. In addition, His body was constantly covered with wounds, abrasions, burns, and hematomas, which could not but cause questions from others. At work, the guy was urged to go to the hospital, so his wife forced him to quit for fear of exposure. After the dismissal, he finally became a hostage of Jordan, who now abused him day and night. Long-awaited deliverance. Despite the horror that was going on in the couple's home, those around them still thought they were a happy family. Maintained social media pages on behalf of her husband, where she regularly posted old photos of them and their children, accompanied by captions about how in love they were and how lucky they were to have met each other. No one could even think that a woman with angelic looks and mother of 2 children behind closed doors turns into a real sophisticated monster. She knocked out her husband's teeth, made a long and deep cut on his arm with a knife. His body did not come off the burns, but at the same time, he could not go to the hospital. And at home, from improvised, means he had only food film and tape which he used to pull the wounds. Neighbors periodically heard screams coming from the house of the couple, and sometimes they were so disturbing that concerned people called the police. But Jordan each time managed to send away the law enforcers, convincing them that she and her husband were fine. However, during the next visit of the squad called by neighbors, one of the police officers noticed a man clutching a fresh wound and blood running down his arm. In addition, he looked emaciated and had bruises of varying degrees on his face. The girl tried to convince the officer that her husband was mentally unstable and sometimes self-mutilated. But this time, the police called the paramedics and Alex was sent to the hospital. The doctors were literally shocked at the condition in which the young man was admitted. There was virtually no life on him, and his arm was so badly damaged that he was in danger of amputation. Alexander's body was covered with 2nd and 3rd degree burns. He weighed only 94 pounds. The ligaments of his shoulder were damaged from blows inflicted with a screwdriver, and there was a deep cut on his forearm, not counting the knocked out teeth and numerous hematomas. At that time, Jordan burst into the hospital, demanding that her husband be handed over to her and assuring her that nothing terrible had happened to him and that he had done all the damage to himself. However, no one believed the distraught woman, and it was decided to take her to the station for questioning. Fair punishment. At first, Worth denied everything and stuck to the original version that her husband was self-harming. But when Alexander's parents arrived at the station, having visited their son in the hospital, the woman changed her face and began to describe in detail all the things she had done to her husband. She said she had trained him like a dog and he wouldn't get away from her. At the same time, Jordan insisted that her husband provoked her to be violent because he was allegedly cheating on her and pissing her off on purpose. She also continued to claim that he was mentally ill and had a tendency to self-injure. Naturally, all these testimonies categorically refuted the parents of the guy, but he himself did not immediately decide to testify against his wife. Only after undergoing a course of treatment and working with a psychologist, Alexander finally dared to talk about all the horrors that he had experienced in his own home in recent years. However, was sure that she would face at most an administrative penalty, so she was not too worried about the upcoming trial. After hearing all the testimony, the judge found 22-year-old Worth guilty of willful infliction of grievous bodily harm, moral and physical abuse, and coercive control. She was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. Even having 2 young children was not a mitigating factor for the sadist. Jordan was shocked by this sentence, and the case itself was unprecedented for the UK. The children were left in the care of their father and grandparents while their mother served her sentence. Alexander, having fully recovered from years of torture, became involved in community work, and is now actively helping victims of domestic violence himself. On July 4, 2023, Jordan, having served 5 years of her 7 and 1 year sentence, was released on parole. However, the woman is forbidden to approach her former spouse and see their joint children. She is reportedly engaged to a bricklayer named Adam Steeth and is preparing to become a mother for the 3rd time. Paradise Beach turned into a death track for lovers. It is believed that an investigation on the heels of a crime is the most effective and often leads to success. The methodology itself implies immediate response, operational collection of evidence, and questioning of witnesses, which significantly increases the chances of quickly solving the case and holding the guilty accountable. However, if it is not possible to identify the perpetrator, the investigation can drag on for years and even decades until the criminal case is frozen and transferred to the archive after the statute of limitations expires. However, sometimes unsolved and seemingly hopeless investigations receive unexpected developments many years later, which helps to find the right lead and achieve results when no one believed it anymore. The case of Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, which had been gathering dust on the shelves for almost 15 years, is a prime example of this. At the time, it was not possible to solve it despite the operational actions of the investigative team and the high reward offered for any information. The main problem was the lack of motive for such a brutal act against the loving couple. In addition to this, it was not possible to find any witnesses, murder weapons, or any significant clues. It was a typical dead end, and no one hoped that the truth would ever be discovered. However, a decade and a half later, solving this case was helped by another brutal crime. It also turned out that at least 4 people knew what had happened, but all these years they remained silent. Who were Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen? Lindsay Cutshall was born in the small town of White Eyes in Coshocton County, Ohio in 1982. She grew up in a very religious family, and her father was a pastor of a Christian community. Despite a strict upbringing from childhood, she was very active, engaged in sports, and later became interested in hiking and extreme tourism. After finishing school, Lindsay became a student at Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia. During those years, she regularly climbed mountains of various difficulty levels, rafted down turbulent mountain rivers, and even organized hikes herself. The young woman dreamed of founding her own summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them the basics of survival in the wild, rafting, tourism, and so on. Jason Allen was born in the city of Zeeland in the American state of Michigan in 1978. He also grew up in a deeply religious family, and from a teenage age was seriously interested in hiking tours, mastering survival in the wild. The young man was tall, athletic, toned, possessed leadership qualities, and was able to find like-minded people to conquer new heights. Couple met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachians. At that time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. The young people immediately felt mutual sympathy, and just 6 months after their first meeting, the young man came to the girl's parents and asked for their daughter's hand in marriage. Her parents were not opposed and gave their blessing to the lovers. The young man's parents also approved of his choice, after which the couple was officially engaged. Allen presented the young woman with a beautiful diamond ring for this occasion, which was soon to be complemented by another, an engagement ring. The young couple planned to get married in September 2004, had big plans for their future together, and wanted to buy their own large house where they could live comfortably and raise their children. Unfortunately, these plans were not meant to come true. The final trip. In the summer of 2004, Lindsay and Jason worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water, located in El Dorado County, California. After their wedding, they planned to open their own similar camp. So they were gaining experience and learning the nuances of working with the younger generation. On the evening of Friday, August 14th of that year, the couple decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. They informed their colleagues of their plans in advance, leaving 2 of the most experienced counselors in charge of the camp. Lindsay and Jason promised to return by Monday, so their short journey was expected to cause no complications, either for the couple or for their temporary replacements. They set off in a 1992 Redford Tempo, owned by Lindsay, and that was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, the counselors had not returned to the camp, but no alarm was raised then, as everyone was confident that the couple would arrive either late at night or early Monday morning. However, when it was discovered after the morning roll call at 8 a.m. that Jason and Lindsay were still missing and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues decided to contact the police and also informed the missing couple's families about the situation. The parents, horrified upon hearing the news, rushed to the camp to learn more about the incident. Everyone knew that the couple was very responsible in their duties. They were never late, and if any unforeseen circumstances had occurred, they would have found a way to communicate that. The challenging search. Upon arrival at the camp, law enforcement officials interviewed the couple's colleagues, and the investigation immediately encountered a serious problem. No one could precisely say where the young couple had gone. It was only known that they planned to explore around San Francisco, and given their great love for adventure and extreme leisure, they could be in the most remote corners where there was neither communication nor civilization. While the police waited the legally mandated 2 days during which the missing were expected to report themselves, relatives and friends decided not to just sit back, but to organize a search themselves. They called everyone they knew, trying to find out when the couple last made contact with anyone, distributed flyers with photos of the bride and groom, and requested anyone who might have seen them to respond immediately. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search operation. The main search unfolded around San Francisco, its suburbs and surroundings. However, the area was vast and it was simply not possible to thoroughly comb through it. Then, one of the friends noted that the couple loved the wild, rocky beaches that were always beautiful and secluded, prompting the police to focus on these areas. Bodies in sleeping bags. For several days, the search yielded no results, and the hope of finding the couple alive was diminishing rapidly. Then, on Wednesday, August 19th, a patrol helicopter flying over one of the rocky wild beaches reported that 2 bodies were found in sleeping bags on the desolate coast, and it seemed unlikely they were just resting there. The first thing police encountered upon arriving at the scene was a red Ford Tempo parked on a cliff near a lookout point in a small shelter for tourists, from which a steep trail led directly to the scenic wild beach. The car was immediately checked in the database and found to belong to the missing student, Lindsay Cutshaw. Descending the trail to the beach, law enforcement found 2 bright sleeping bags containing individuals. At first, it might have seemed they were merely sleeping, but no response came to calls or noise. Approaching closer, the officers saw that the sleeping bags contained a young man and woman, both showing no signs of life. A brief initial examination suggested that their lives had been taken by gunshot wounds to the head, and given the distinctive smell of decomposition, they had been there for more than a day. All the belongings of the deceased, including mobile phones and wallets containing bank cards and cash, were found beside them. Therefore, a robbery as the main motive was almost immediately ruled out. The keys to the parked car above were also visibly placed, ruling out car theft as a motive. Investigators immediately suspected that the deceased were the same young people who had gone missing last week near San Francisco. Their suspicion was confirmed by documents found nearby under the names Lindsay Cutshaw and Jason Allen. But the bodies still needed to be identified by relatives. The arriving parents of the couple, who had hoped until the last that the remains belonged to someone else, were devastated by grief upon recognizing their children. Investigation and initial theories. Thus, theories involving robbery or an attempted carjacking were dismissed since all valuables, money and keys were left untouched in plain sight. Moreover, forensic analysis revealed no signs of physical assault or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were simply sleeping peacefully at the time of the incident, and did not have a chance to react. They made no attempt to defend themselves, flee, or even get out of their sleeping bags. Everything pointed to a swift act that resembled an execution or vendetta. But who could have taken the lives of 2 individuals in such a brutal manner and why? The questions multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. There were no signs that anyone else had stayed in the area. The beach was quite secluded, and accessing it via the steep trail was challenging. Despite efforts, no shell casings were found nearby, leading investigators to theorize that the shooter either took them or threw them into the ocean. The shots had been fired at close range into the heads of the sleeping tourists, indicated by specific traces, so the casings, if not deliberately moved, would have been nearby. Interestingly, the beach appeared quite clean. Yet a few meters from where the sleeping bags with the bodies were found, an empty beer bottle lay. The deceased did not drink alcohol as they led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting the bottle might belong to the mysterious shooter. This particular brand of beer was rarely found in the area and likely came from a neighboring state. As no other clues were found, this bottle was considered a significant lead, although it was unclear whether it had any connection to the shooter or the crime. A theory was proposed that the deceased might have had a conflict with someone the day before the tragedy, and their opponent returned at night with a weapon to settle the score. Although Jason and Lindsay were very friendly with everyone, it was not excluded that they might have inadvertently displeased someone either in appearance or for some other reason. Additionally, the shooter could have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. From the bullets extracted from the victims' skulls, experts determined they were fired from a Marlin brand rifle, .45 caliber, model 1894, produced by Marlin Firearms Company. This was a rare weapon that might have been part of a collector's arsenal. Such models were typically used for hunting. This clue was significant for the ongoing investigation, but it remained the only one for the time being. Investigators speculated that the shooter was likely a male acting alone. He could have been a hunter, collector, or firearm enthusiast. The couple's route, search, and witness interviews. The investigation now aimed to establish the route the couple had taken, who they might have contacted, and when they were last seen alive. The first task presented few issues, as the couple had taken numerous photos and their camera remained untouched among their personal belongings. Additionally, in the tourist cabin near the lookout point where they parked their car, there was a guest book where visitors could leave notes. The engaged couple had written a couple of entries expressing that it was one of the best weekends of their lives, filled with love, happiness, and the discovery of perhaps the most beautiful beach they had ever seen. It was discovered that on Saturday, the couple had stopped at a fishing pier about 20 miles from where their lives were ultimately taken. This was evidenced by the photographs they had taken there, prompting law enforcement to visit the area and speak with locals in search of potential witnesses. Many remembered the young couple traveling in a red car. They were looking for a place to stay overnight, but found no vacancies in any of the 3 nearby hotels. This was because August is peak tourist season in the area, and most travelers booked their accommodations well in advance. The couple then dined at a local restaurant, walked around the area, took several photos, and set off again in the evening. According to everyone who saw and interacted with them, they were friendly, engaged in no conflicts, and appeared happy and carefree. None of the witnesses could recall anything suspicious or unusual. Notably, the beach where the bodies were found was located in a protected area where camping was prohibited. However, since the young people could not find a place to stay overnight, they decided to settle on the beach, but chose not to set up a tent, instead using their sleeping bags. They believed that on a warm August night on a secluded beach, they faced no threats and planned to head back at dawn to return to the Rock and Water Camp on Sunday as promised. This information helped narrow down the time frame during which the couple was likely taken from life. They went to sleep but did not survive until morning, indicating they were likely taken from life between 11 o'clock Saturday night and dawn on Sunday. The first suspect. Although the investigation into the double taking of life was in full swing and news broadcasts urged anyone with any relevant information to contact the police, law enforcement withheld certain details. In particular, the results of the ballistics analysis were kept secret to avoid alerting the suspect and prompting them to hastily dispose of the weapon used in the crime. Initially, suspicion fell on a local drifter who periodically slept on that very beach and had been seen nearby on the evening before the crime. The homeless man, mentioned by some witnesses, was quickly located, brought to the station, and interrogated. The 57-year-old suspect had no alibi for the night of the crime. However, his involvement could not be confirmed. The main reasons were the absence of the weapon used in the crime and the fact that his DNA did not match that found on the beer bottle discovered on the beach. A new phase of the investigation in 2006. For nearly 2 years, the investigation had been at a standstill with no clear direction on how to proceed. Then, in the spring of 2006, law enforcement decided to publicize the data they had on the weapon used in the crime and to reach out again to potential witnesses by offering a $50,000 reward for any useful information that could lead to the perpetrator. Following this announcement, about 1,000 calls came in, but most did not aid the advancement of the investigation. However, law enforcement became interested in 26-year-old Sean Gowlin, pointed out by several locals. According to them, the young man collected firearms and bladed weapons, behaved aggressively, was frequently involved in conflicts, threatened acts of violence, and occasionally damaged other people's property. Sean was arrested and questioned. He had previously been on the police's radar for brawling, hooliganism, and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He indeed had an impressive collection of weapons, but the specific rifle in question was not among them. Verifying his alibi from 2 years prior proved impossible, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene. So Gowlin had to be released. A suspect from another country? Simultaneously, another suspicious and aggressive drifter came under scrutiny, often seen with a firearm, frightening the local residents. His name was Joseph Henry Burgess, and he was 61 years old at the time of the couple's demise. Burgess often ranted about receiving commands from God. It was discovered that in the late 1970s, Joseph lived in Canada, where he also wandered aimlessly. In 1978, he joined the Commune of the Children of God, positioning himself as a deeply religious person. And according to those around him, he was quite the fanatic. He soon had a conflict with 2 young people that escalated into outright enmity. And a few weeks later, these individuals were found lifeless, each with several close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Notably, their bodies were also discovered on a beach in sleeping bags, seemingly taken while they slept. By the time the police arrived, Burgess had vanished. His guilt was proven through numerous left-behind clues, but he could not be convicted as he had fled to the USA, crossing the border illegally. He managed to evade capture for nearly a quarter of a century until the police connected him with the double homicide on a beach in California. However, they were unable to interrogate him as a shootout occurred during his apprehension, resulting in the deaths of a police sergeant and Burgess himself, who opened fire, a fatal echo from the past. In the spring of 2017 in Forestville, California, a tragedy unfolded one night on March 14th. Gunshots rang out in the Gallin family home, prompting alarmed neighbors to immediately call the police. The victim was 35-year-old Seamus Gallin, and the perpetrator was his older brother, Sean. An argument had erupted between the siblings, during which Sean, under the influence of prohibited substances, grabbed a firearm and discharged 3 bullets into his younger brother. Police recognized the shooter's name as Sean had previously been detained as a suspect in the double homicide on a beach, but was released due to a lack of evidence. Since then, he had been in police sites twice for property damage and making threats, but had only received fines. It was also discovered that the detainee was an avid hunter and had a hobby of crafting knives and other bladed weapons. Those around him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After taking his brother's life, Sean attempted to flee but was almost immediately apprehended. Law enforcement then decided to thoroughly reinvestigate this man's potential involvement in a couple's perpetration from 13 years prior. His personal social media page revealed much, where he posted pictures of his substantial weapon collection and discussed supposed telepathic and extrasensory abilities. According to his posts, he believed he was on a special mission, receiving assignments from space. This seemed like delusions of a disturbed mind, and police suspected Sean indeed had serious mental disorders. He stubbornly refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke nonsensically, and insisted on his innocence. However, when detectives checked the personal messages on his deceased brother's page, they found something intriguing. Back in 2006, when a $50,000 reward was offered for information on the double homicide case, Sean's former girlfriend had messaged Seamus, suggesting she could claim the reward by turning in her ex-boyfriend. They both knew everything but kept silent. Unfortunately, questioning either was no longer possible since the brother had been shot and the woman had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. An unexpected confession. Initially, Sean denied any involvement and refused to speak. But when shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he surprisingly confessed and began to give a detailed account. His narrative not only surprised, but shocked law enforcement. Despite more than 13 years passing since the double homicide, Gowan remembered the details of that night vividly. That evening, he had left his house with a Marlin rifle, intending to hunt in a wooded area. He aimlessly wandered for a couple of hours before descending a trail to a wild beach, which he claimed was a spot to encounter boars. As he walked along the shore, he spotted 2 bright sleeping bags. Approaching closer, he discovered a young man and woman sound asleep inside. He stood watching them for several minutes, then suddenly heard voices in his head commanding him to end their lives. Sean claimed this was the mission from space. He could not ignore. He placed the barrel of his rifle almost against the young man's head and pulled the trigger. The sound woke the young woman, but before she could comprehend the situation, a second shot ended her life as well. He decided to collect the casings and carry them away in a beer can he had emptied while descending to the beach. Later, according to him, he tossed the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he went to give the rifle to his father, and asked him to hide it. His elderly father asked no questions and simply buried the weapon in the dirt floor of the cellar in his old barn. Remarkably, Sean's claims were verified. The rifle was found at the site of the now-collapsed barn, and the beer can with the casing still rested in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The fact that the murderer's father had passed away in 2009 and his property had since fallen into disrepair and abandonment helped preserve these items. It turned out that the bottle found on the beach had no connection to the crime and was mistakenly considered as evidence. Forensic psychiatric evaluation Sean Gowan blamed the voices in his head, which he claimed ordered him to commit acts of violence and asserted that he was not aware of his actions. His defense attorneys also insisted that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. It was up to qualified psychiatrists to determine the truth of these claims. The evaluation revealed that the accused did indeed suffer from a range of mental disorders, exacerbated by the effects of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, at the time of the crime, he acted deliberately, carefully planning each step. Sean was fully aware of how to proceed and how to cover his tracks to avoid police detection. This was precisely why he first ended the life of the young man, knowing that if anything went awry, the woman would not be able to resist. For the same reason, he took the casings with him and prudently gave the rifle to his father, asking him to hide it. According to the psychiatrists, although Gallin had mental deviations, he was competent to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. What was surprising in this complex case was that his parents, brother, and former girlfriend knew, or at least suspected, that he had committed the double homicide. Yet none of them had turned him over to the police. Trial and sentence. The trial of the accused took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the brutal act against the couple. On June 17th of that year, Sean Gallin was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 94 years for the end of his own brother's life in 2017. The convicted man is now serving his sentence in a special prison unit designated for particularly dangerous inmates with mental disorders. He continues to claim that he hears voices and behaves aggressively. Hence, he is kept under special surveillance to prevent him from harming himself or anyone else nearby. Lastly, it should be noted that the motive for the double homicide was never established. Sean simply saw the couple sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives. Corey Day Desmond was born March 18, 1980, at Torrance Memorial Hospital. And right from the start, she was the center of attention because she had to fight to survive. Due to a hole in her diaphragm, she had to undergo multiple surgeries. She was only given a 20% chance of survival. And miraculously, she not only survived, but she thrived. Friends and family of Desmond knew her as a smart, self-confident young woman, unafraid to express her opinion, who was energetic and full of affection for those she cared about, who were many. Desmond graduated from North Torrance High School and earned a master's degree in criminal justice from Long Beach State. Unsure of her calling in life, she changed her mind and decided to become a teacher. Her goal was to teach autistic children. A week after her death, a notice came in the mail that she had earned her teaching credential. She was loved by many and a friend to all. She was sweet at times but could be tough as nails. She could command a bar full of patrons when she wanted, and all the while be singing one of her favorite karaoke songs, such as Black Velvet or These Boots Were Made for Walking. And once again, being the center of attention. It was that secondary family that Corey acquired while working in those various establishments that kept her going back despite what her family wanted her to do. In 2009, Corey worked in a bar. On Saturday, February 14th, she had a shift that ended at 9:30 p.m. She then walked 2 blocks to the popular Bar Street Lounge. Many employees of this bar knew Corey as she had friends working there. She was caught on surveillance cameras helping her friends at the bar. She left there only after closing, around 2 a.m. None of her friends saw her after that. On Monday, February 16th, at approximately 2:20 p.m., the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office received a terrifying call. About 100 miles from the bar where people last saw Corey, a driver stopped to take snow chains off the wheels. The man felt a strong, unpleasant smell as soon as he exited the car. He thought the source of the stench was an animal that got hit by a car but still decided to check. Not far from the car, he found something strange. He saw a black plastic garbage bag with a woman's body inside. The man ran out into the road in a panic, stopping cars and asking to call the police as his phone's battery was dead. They identified the victim by fingerprints and driver's license. It was 28-year-old Corey Day Desmond. Subjected to a brutal attack, the woman died from strangulation. She had a lot of bruises on her face and neck and injuries to the back of her head. Corey tried to fight back as she had several defense wounds. Although unable to determine the exact time of death, the medical experts said Corey was on the street for about 12 to 36 hours before the man found her. Corey's pants were unbuttoned and pulled to her knees, but no signs of intimate contact were found. The first conclusion that investigators came to was that the place where the driver found Corey's body was not the place of her death. The criminal left her body by the side of the road, hoping it would take time to find it. Before the man found her body, the rain destroyed all possible evidence. Reporting bad news to the families of the dead or missing is perhaps the hardest thing in the work of a policeman. At that time, Corey was living with her grandmother. The news about the granddaughter's body found in a garbage bag shocked the woman. And this news was no less devastating for Mark, Corey's father. Mark knew perfectly well how the system worked. Sometimes the police delay the investigation for many months because they need a warrant to conduct searches, interrogations, and fingerprinting. There are cases when time-consuming bureaucracy slows down the process of solving a crime. Therefore, Mark decided not to sit and wait for the police to find the person who deprived him of his daughter. He decided to act. He said love for his daughter gave him the strength to look for the criminal. Mark found Corey's Jeep Wrangler in an alley next to the bar where she worked. He also discovered that Corey disappeared on the night of February 15th. But unfortunately, No one knew about it. Grandma did not panic because Corey was already an adult and could stay overnight with a friend or friends. In addition, she often worked late into the night and came home when her grandmother was already asleep. Investigators went to the bar where Desmond worked to find possible witnesses or leads. They talked to other employees and learned that Corey finished her shift at 9:30 p.m. and then went to another bar. She often did that. Her friends worked at that bar, and Corey often visited them at the end of her shift. She helped at the bar or chatted with friends while sitting at the counter. Besides, it brought her extra tips. Bar visitors knew her face well, and many perceived Corey as another employee. Surveillance cameras confirmed the words of the visitors. They captured the girl helping her friends at the bar. Unfortunately, a bartender's job is not only to pour drinks and entertain the interlocutors. Sometimes, after drinking alcohol, some people stop controlling their emotions and their behavior becomes inappropriate. That evening, Corey was unlucky enough to meet such a person. According to eyewitnesses, she argued with some man who behaved provocatively. He bothered women and unceremoniously touched them, making unflattering compliments. While everyone was silent and did not dare to put this man in his place, Corey stood up for the bar's visitors. In other words, the girl explained to the man that he was not welcome there. The violent guest was furious but still agreed to leave. Corey continued to help her friends and made drinks at the bar as if nothing had happened. That evening, she consumed alcohol, but it did not affect her behavior. After 2 a.m., she left the bar alone and planned to go home. But as we now know, a man found Corey's lifeless body 100 miles from the bar the next day. Mark gave the police all the information he could find. Through television, he appealed to everyone to report any crucial information for the investigation. Meanwhile, the police identified the man Corey quarreled with before her death. During a conversation with investigators, the man said he did not know who Corey Desmond was. However, he did not deny having a big fight with the girl in a bar on February 14th. The man said alcohol made him uncontrollable, confirming that they kicked him out of the bar. Right after that, he went home to sleep. The suspect denied any involvement in the crime. He agreed to take a polygraph test and let the police search his house and car. They carefully examined the suspect's car. After all, there could have been traces like blood stains, hair, or something belonging to Corey. The car was dirty both inside and outside, and yet forensic experts did not find any evidence there. While searching the man's house, they found nothing indicating his involvement in the crime. The last hope of the investigators to catch the man in a lie was a polygraph test. But the man passed it without much difficulty, answering all the questions of the police. In addition, his wife confirmed that he came home before 2 a.m. and immediately went to bed. Corey left the bar around 2 a.m., which means this man was not involved in her death. Thus, the police excluded him from the list of suspects, but the problem was that they had no other persons of interest in this investigation. They studied Corey's personal life, trying to find out if she had enemies who could wish her harm. Investigators found out another strange detail. The owner of the bar where Corey worked said that that night, she came and asked for permission to use the toilet. But since the bar was closed, he refused the girl's request and advised her to go home. It was about 2:20 in the morning. What happened next remained a mystery because Corey never got in the car and did not go home. Investigators assumed that she had been abducted or assaulted near her place of work. However, the bar's surveillance cameras did not record this, and there were no witnesses on the street at such a late hour. At the time of Corey's death, her blood alcohol content was more than 4 times the legal limit for driving. It was unclear whether she planned to use her car or was looking for other ways to get home. Unfortunately, she did not meet anyone who would help her that night. A month later, the investigation reached a dead end. The police checked all the versions and clues but found no new suspects. Corey's father, Mark, wasn't going to give up. He rented 3 billboards on Artesia Boulevard in Redondo Beach. The billboards contained a photo of his daughter with the question, "Who killed Corey Day Desmond?" The man offered a $15,000 reward for any information helpful to the police. "I'm going to keep them up there to let people know the guy is still out there," Mark Desmond said. "Maybe it will save somebody." To some extent, this story is similar to the one of Alexandra Kemp. The latter's father, Roger, did everything to find the criminal, and billboards played a crucial role in solving the crime. Information about Corey periodically appeared on 50 electronic billboards. Eventually, it brought results. In May 2009, the phone rang at the police station. A woman named Tiffany saw one of the billboards with a photo of Corey. Thanks to this woman, the police were able to solve this case. Tiffany spoke very quietly. The woman was experiencing stress and severe fright. She rambled as if she didn't know where to start. Then she finally focused and said, "Hello, my name is Tiffany. I think my boyfriend, Tony Lopez Perez, killed that bartender girl, Corey Day Desmond. Please check him. He's behaving strangely, but I'll tell you more when we meet." Tiffany called several times to arrange a meeting with the detective. During their conversation in the park, the woman told him about her suspicions. According to her, on February 14th, she and Tony planned a romantic Valentine's Day dinner. She spent the whole evening preparing for a date. Tiffany took the children to their grandparents, visited a beauty salon, and bought a new red dress. Tony loved it when she wore red clothes. It drove him crazy. The guy was working that day but had to return home around 11:30 p.m. Tiffany waited for Tony almost all night. The woman tried to contact him, but he did not answer calls and messages. Tony returned home at 4:30 in the morning and, as if nothing had happened, said he was too drunk to go home. He said he fell asleep in his car. Tiffany mentioned that Tony rarely cleaned the interior of his car. However, after a few days he bought a whole set of cleaning products. He washed the car thoroughly, not letting her help. The guy's behavior seemed strange, but at that moment, she did not attach much importance to it. A few days later, Tony sold his white Dodge for almost nothing and bought another car. He also changed his phone number for no apparent reason. A little later, they had a joint trip to Big Bear Lake. They chatted along the way and everything seemed normal until Tony suddenly stopped the car on the side of the road. He turned to Tiffany and asked her, "Do you think this dead girl, what was her name, the bartender, was dumped here? I'm almost 100% sure that the police found her body here." Tony Lopez Perez and Tiffany lived together for about 4 years. They had a 6-year-old son together, but they never married. He was a hardworking man and got along well with everyone. He has never had any problems with the law. Perez came from a large family with 8 siblings. His parents grew up in the LA area, and Perez attended high school in Manhattan Beach. Tony's absence on the day of Corey's death, cleaning the car and urgently selling it, a strange trip, and an equally strange comment about where the police found her body, a change of phone number and odd behavior. Putting all these facts together, Tiffany realized that Tony could be the one who took the life of Corey Desmond. She didn't want to believe it. The investigators decided to talk to Tony and went to his house. To prevent him from suspecting anything, Tiffany agreed to play along with the police, not telling him anything about this conversation. It looked as if they were conducting a routine interview of people to find witnesses in the Corey Desmond case. Tony looked calm, like a person with nothing to hide. He wasn't nervous while answering all the questions. He said he didn't know her, mentioning he had only seen Corey in the newspapers. However, to arrest Tony Lopez Perez for taking the life of Corey, they needed hard evidence. Thus, the police found the new owner of the Dodge that Tony sold shortly after the news of Corey's death. The new owner confirmed that Tony sold him his car for a low price. He allowed the police to check the vehicle for any evidence. Tiffany said Tony cleaned the interior thoroughly before selling his car. However, when the experts applied luminol and used an ultraviolet lamp, it became evident why Tony Lopez Perez got rid of his car. The interior of the car lit up in bright blue. Police asked Tony to come to the police station. They didn't tell him anything about the find so he wouldn't run away. At first, he claimed he had never seen Corey, but later changed his testimony, saying he saw her near the bar and whistled at her. As soon as the police noticed that the man was changing his testimony, they showed him photos of the car he had sold and said that they had found crucial evidence there. This time, Tony claimed to have seen Corey outside the bar. Standing under a street lamp, she suddenly lost consciousness and fell on the sidewalk. He tried to help her, but she did not regain consciousness. Then he started slapping Corey on the cheeks. Corey opened her eyes and started screaming. She told him to get out and asked him to let her go. According to Tony, he got scared, put his hands over her mouth, and accidentally strangled her. Fearing he would get blamed for Corey's death, he put her body in the back seat of his car and drove home. Perez said he woke up during the night and went outside to see if it was a nightmare. "I opened the door and it was not a nightmare," Perez told detectives. It was true. Perez said he went back inside and tried to get some sleep. In the morning, he went to work with Desmond's body still in the back seat. At the end of the working day, he placed her body in 2 garbage bags, took it to a remote area, and left it next to the side of the road. According to Tony's story, what he did to Corey was an accident. He claimed that he was drunk and scared. He accidentally strangled her in a state of panic, but Corey's injuries suggested otherwise. She had severe injuries on the back of her head, bruises on her face and neck, and defense wounds on her hands. Moreover, Corey's pants were down to her knees. Tony Perez was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The next day, he showed the police where he dumped Corey's body. In addition to Tony's confession, they now had the results of DNA tests. Corey's blood matched the blood found in the car that Tony sold immediately after committing the crime. At the 2011 trial, Coroner Jack Sheridan testified to the multiple contusions to the victim's head, the evidence of strangulation, and the blunt force trauma to her face. Sheridan also said she had scratches on her body that suggested the criminal dragged her after her death. Based on Corey's injuries, prosecutors said Perez assaulted her and tried to force her into intimacy in the early morning of February 15, 2009. Corey resisted. Unable to get what he wanted, Perez strangled her. Tiffany Ware testified during the trial. She told the San Bernardino County jury that her former boyfriend, Tony Lopez Perez, had an insatiable appetite for sex in January and February 2009. Even though they were making love almost every day, Ware said Perez was still not satisfied. Tiffany also told the court that Tony had twice engaged in intimacy with her against her will. It happened after the birth of their son and with an interval of about a month. Both incidents occurred when she was fast asleep on the couch after taking painkillers due to severe back pain. Perez, who chose not to testify at the trial, made his first statements to the court during his sentencing. He said he was taught to love and respect those around him, but that he veered off course at times. I forgot the key lessons I was taught about in life, which make me a man, a father, a loving uncle to many and a responsible person who supports his family that I so love, Perez said. In the end, I fell short. He generally stuck to the story his attorney Andrew Hanel presented at the trial, that he was scared and didn't mean to hurt Desmond. Hanel argued to a jury of 6 men and 6 women that Perez found her passed out on the sidewalk. He said he tried to calm her down and didn't mean to kill her. I should have thought before acting, Perez said. I should have stepped back and cleared my head. Fear took over. I was so scared, so careless. Corey's father, Mark Desmond, said his daughter had a beautiful future ahead of her before her life was cut short at the age of 28. Tony Perez should live the rest of his miserable life knowing he killed his own children's hopes and dreams at the same time he was killing Corey, her father said. He embodies all the characteristics that women in society fear. Just before sentencing, Perez asked God in the court to show him mercy. My very deepest apologies to the Desmond family and to my own family. I have brought such hurt and sorrow to the Desmonds that will forever shape their life. I hope he never gets out in the street again, said Desmond's grandmother Beverly. I hope he suffers as much as she suffered. In July 2011, a jury of 6 men and 6 women found 36-year-old Tony Lopez Perez guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Corey Desmond's family expressed gratitude to Tiffany Ware, thanks to whom the police solved this case. If it hadn't been for her, I don't think they would have ever found out it was him, said Leslie Schwab, a family friend who attended every day of the trial, along with about a dozen others in San Bernardino County. Tara Baker was born on January 20, 1977, in East Point, Georgia. Her parents divorced when she was young, and sometime later her mother remarried. Tara had 2 brothers and a sister, making her the oldest of 4. From a very young age, Tara showed a keen interest in the legal system and wanted to become either a lawyer or a judge. She would hold trials with her stuffed animals, make legal contracts with her relatives, and often write letters to various politicians. Once, she even wrote to the President of the United States and complained that his speech had interrupted her favorite TV show. After graduating high school, she attended Georgia College. She graduated early in just 3 years, earning 2 bachelor's degrees. In 1999, Tara enrolled at the University of Georgia to complete her education. This university was one of the top law schools in the country and was located in a small town called Athens, just a few hours' drive from her parents' home. So it was the perfect choice for Tara. She didn't want to live in a dorm again after college, so she decided to rent off-campus housing instead. She chose a house split into 3 separate rooms for rent. 2 other university students rented the other rooms, one of whom Tara knew well from college. For some time, Tara worked at a prestigious law firm in downtown Athens, which allowed her not only to cover rent and other expenses, but also to gain valuable experience in her future profession. In January 2001, when Tara was 23 and in her second year, She spent a lot of time studying at the university library. The evening of January 18th was no exception. She, along with her friend, went to the library and spent several hours there. Her friend left for home around 7:30 p.m., while Tara decided to stay longer. At approximately 9:46 p.m., she called her friend from the library to check if she had gotten home safely. Tara also mentioned that she planned to head home in a few minutes. The next day, around 6 p.m., her mother, Virginia Baker, received a phone call. At first, she thought someone was playing a prank on her because the caller identified themselves as a detective and asked if her daughter had ever been arrested, as they needed her fingerprints. Thinking it was a joke, Virginia hung up, but then she decided to call the Athens police station. To her surprise, they confirmed that she had indeed spoken to a real detective and informed her that there had been a fire at Tara's house. Still not fully understanding what was going on, Virginia asked to speak to her daughter. The detective replied that they couldn't find her and that an unidentified body had been found in the house, which was why they needed Tara's fingerprints. The detective further explained that they had only been able to locate one of Tara's roommates, who was not home at the time of the fire. The whereabouts of the other roommate and Tara were still unknown, and investigators believed that the body might belong to one of them. Virginia then asked to describe the room where the body was found. The detective's response left her speechless. They said that the room was filled with antique stuff, and Tara had been collecting such items for years. Tara's family immediately drove to Athens, hoping it was all just a misunderstanding and that Tara was okay. When they arrived at the police station, they were kept waiting for a long time without any information. Several hours later, a detective finally informed them that the body found in the house belonged to Tara and that she had been murdered, not killed in the fire. The detective then said he was too tired to answer their questions. Before leaving, he added that Tara had left them a gift. Under her nails, experts had found fragments of the perpetrator's skin, which might help identify him. Tara's relatives, shocked by the news of her murder, were left in confusion and despair. Despite their pleas for more information, the police did not provide any further details. The family desperately tried to get some answers, but detectives continued to refuse to share any information with them. Since then, the local police department has never contacted the family, and Tara's relatives had to beg for any information by calling and visiting the station over and over again. They eventually managed to piece together some of what had happened. Around 11 a.m. on January 19th, firefighters were called to Tara's address. After extinguishing the fire, they found a body inside, later identified as Tara Baker. Medical experts concluded that Tara had been murdered. Her body showed signs of strangulation and stab wounds, and she had likely been assaulted. The fire had started after her death, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator set it to destroy evidence. However, Tara's parents were never able to get the police to show them the medical examiner's report or provide detailed information about the murder. Tara's family also learned that many pieces of evidence might have been destroyed by the firefighters, which is not uncommon in such cases. Their primary goal was to extinguish the blaze and potentially rescue any survivors, and they couldn't have known that there was a murder victim inside. The family also discovered that the investigators likely didn't secure the house after finding the body, allowing anyone to approach or even enter the crime scene. As Tara's relatives gathered these pieces of information, they not only encountered the police's reluctance to keep them informed about the investigation, but also faced constant rudeness and unprofessionalism. At one point, they even started recording their conversations with the police and filed complaints against the local investigators. But this led nowhere. They eventually decided to conduct their own investigation and reached out to a well-known criminologist who agreed to help them. However, the local police department agreed to show him the case materials only on the condition that he would not share any information or findings with anyone outside the investigation, including Tara's relatives. The family hadn't been able to obtain Tara's death certificate for 10 years. It was only after writing to the state governor that they finally received the document. But even then, the detailed cause of death was not listed. It simply stated multiple injuries. Despite all this, the police did continue their investigation, although there were many questionable moments in their actions, which we'll discuss a bit later. When firefighters extinguished the blaze and discovered Tara's body, they called the police. Realizing it was a murder, investigators searched for evidence at the crime scene, but the room was severely damaged by fire and water. As the family later found out, some surviving items were never examined for fingerprints. The police were able to determine that Tara's laptop was missing from her room. Considering it was 2001, the laptop was quite a bulky piece of tech, yet no other valuable items were taken. This raised doubts about the robbery gone wrong motive. There were no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to believe that Tara might have known her killer and let them involuntarily. Although the fire and firefighting efforts had damaged the crime scene so much that it was difficult to be certain. Both of Tara's roommates were out of town that evening, so she was home alone. Establishing the time of death was challenging, so medical experts estimated a time frame from 10 p.m., when Tara left the library, to 11 a.m., when neighbors called the fire department. The crime likely occurred closer to the morning hours since the fire didn't need much time to spread. The police also found witnesses who saw a middle-aged white man running down the street that morning. He was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans, which was odd given the fact it was winter. They soon found out about a phone call to Tara's university a few days before the murder. The university had a number for requesting student information, like phone numbers, which was used by students themselves or faculty. A man, sounding heavily intoxicated, called and asked for Tara Baker's phone number. He only managed to write it correctly on the 8th attempt. While this was highly suspicious, the man's identity was never determined. At the time of her murder, Tara had a boyfriend who became a person of interest from the very beginning. He provided an alibi that was confirmed, yet the police were reluctant to remove him from their list of suspects. Even after verifying his alibi, they treated him with suspicion, calling him and his parents in the middle of the night and demanding that he come to the station in another city to provide additional biological samples, answer questions, or undergo a polygraph test. It's worth mentioning that it was Tara's boyfriend who had to identify her. He lived in another city and came to Athens immediately upon hearing about the fire. Although Tara's parents were already in town, the police asked the boyfriend to identify her. They brought him directly to the house, but he wasn't allowed inside. Instead, a police officer went in, took a photograph of the body, and showed it to him on the camera screen. Shocked, he said he couldn't be sure if it was Tara. He then mentioned that he had given her earrings, and if he saw them, he could be certain. The officer went back inside, removed the earrings from the body, and showed them to him. Only after that did the boyfriend confirm they belonged to Tara. The police soon focused their attention on another individual, a student who attended the same classes as Tara and had a troubling reputation. Several female students came forward, saying that he repeatedly asked various girls out on dates and often didn't take no for an answer. He had also asked Tara out multiple times, even though she had been telling him that she had a boyfriend. Some girls also mentioned that this person scared them with his creepy behavior and made them feel uncomfortable. Detectives began to investigate him, but they couldn't find any evidence linking him to the crime. At one point, they even asked Tara's friend to keep an eye on him, which was a quite controversial move, but it led nowhere. Another suspect was an attorney who worked at the same company as Tara. Talking to her colleagues, investigators found out that shortly before the murder, the man began acting quite strangely. In their company, there was a close-knit group of employees who socialized outside of work pretty often. At some point, this attorney suddenly quit their group. Moreover, just a few days before the incident, he told Tara that he wouldn't be able to attend her birthday celebration, which was scheduled for the day after the murder. On the morning of January 19th, before the fire started, one of Tara's colleagues decided to try and convince him to come to the celebration since Tara considered him a good friend, and she was hurt by his sudden decision. The colleague went to his office, but he wasn't there. Considering that his workday had already begun, this was strange. He had always been present at the office in the mornings, but on that particular day it wasn't the case. The colleague also checked his work schedule, thinking he might have meetings, but it was empty. He didn't show up that day, but the next day he went to another colleague's house and behaved quite strangely. Many people who knew him suspected that he regularly used illicit substances, which could have explained his behavior. But there was more. The colleague noticed several fresh scratches on his neck. As we remember, skin particles from the perpetrator were found under Tara's nails, which meant that she had probably scratched her attacker. The attorney claimed he was scratched by a cat and denied any involvement in Tara's murder. However, when asked who he thought committed the crime, he acted quite oddly. He started shouting that it was her father, but provided no explanation to support this claim. Another weird thing was that the attorney suddenly resigned just a few months after the murder and left the state. It's unknown whether the police compared his DNA with the samples found under the victim's nails. Moreover, for all these years, there has been no information about whether these samples were even examined. Like with all other parts of the investigation, detectives didn't share any information, not even with Tara's relatives. The police later found out that the attorney was secretly dating two female colleagues from the company, despite being married. This could have explained his strange behavior and absence from work without apparent reasons. Both of these women also claimed they were sure he was using illegal substances. The police weren't able to find any evidence linking him to the murder, and eventually they stopped considering him a suspect. Detectives also looked into the employees of the maintenance company associated with the house where Tara rented a room. They had spare keys, which could have explained the absence of signs of forced entry, but they couldn't find any leads there either. Since then, there had been no significant progress in the case. The police continued to search for new suspects and witnesses while keeping most details of the investigation secret, insisting that releasing such information could harm their efforts. Over time, they received several more potential leads. One witness reported seeing an African-American man outside Tara's house a few hours before the fire. Another mentioned seeing blood on a university classmate's notebook shortly after the murder. Police investigated both leads, but they didn't lead anywhere. Tara's parents raised $27,000 and offered it as a reward for any information that could help solve the case. Over the years, almost all detectives working on the case changed. The new team continued their efforts to crack the case, but there were no new breakthroughs. The main issue was the lack of evidence, as the fire and the firefighters' actions destroyed almost everything inside Tara's room that could have been of interest to the investigation. In 2020, 19 years after Tara's murder, a podcast emerged shedding light on her case. Alongside Tara's family and other people involved in the case, this podcast gathered all available information about the crime, sparking a new wave of interest. The police department also took notice of the podcast, leading to increased communication between the new detectives and Tara's family. Thanks to that, the police began working on the case more thoroughly, but there was still no progress. The podcast episodes dedicated to Tara aired for 2 years, significantly impacting the fate of the case. It became one of the reasons why Georgia's government came up with a bill aimed at reducing the number of unsolved cases in the state. This bill was named after Tara and another young woman from Georgia, whose murder remained unsolved. 18-year-old Rhonda Coleman was found dead in 1990, and her killer has not been found to this day. Even though Rhonda's murder was clearly unrelated to Tara's death, it was decided to name this initiative the Coleman-Baker Bill. In 2023, the bill unanimously passed, and the governor of Georgia came to Athens to sign it in the presence of the families of both victims. The law aimed to establish an unsolved cases unit within the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It also empowered the family of the victims to request the police to review unsolved cases, re-examine evidence, and take other steps to solve them. As soon as the law was signed in 2023, such a unit was established, specifically focusing on Tara's murder. Detectives reviewed all available information and began examining the few pieces of evidence utilizing modern DNA analysis tools. This went on for several months until May 13, 2024, when the police called a press conference. After 23 years since the murder, they announced that the perpetrator had finally been arrested. The culprit turned out to be a 48-year-old man named Edric Faust. During the conference, investigators didn't disclose how exactly they identified the suspect, only mentioning that modern DNA analysis tools and other biological evidence played a crucial role. They refrained from revealing all details to avoid compromising the ongoing legal proceedings, and only at trial would they disclose what evidence they have against Faust. In Faust's arrest documents, among other charges, he was accused of assaulting the victim, so his biological material could have matched the DNA sample from Tara's body. As we also recall, traces of the assailant's skin were found under the victim's nails, and it's possible that modern tools allowed experts to extract the killer's DNA from it. As for Faust, he likely should have been in the FBI database for a long time due to his extensive criminal record, including numerous arrests for various offenses. At the time of Tara's murder, he was 25 and living in the same city. However, police stated they couldn't find any evidence indicating the suspect knew the victim, suggesting Faust might have broken into her home or convinced her to let him in under some pretext. Detectives also revealed that Faust had never been a suspect in the case and only came under their radar a few days before his arrest, thanks to innovative DNA analysis methods. At the moment, Faust remains in jail awaiting trial, and only during the process will we learn what evidence the police were able to find against him. Apparently, detectives did obtain indisputable DNA evidence, as Faust was denied bail. They have no doubt that Faust is responsible for Tara's murder, so her case is officially closed. Tara's family, who fought for the truth for 23 years, finally learned what happened to her and thanked the new team of detectives for bringing closure to the case. As for Rhonda Coleman, the other woman after whom the law was named, her case remains unsolved. However, her family can now hope that detectives will discover new evidence and hold the culprit accountable, as it happened in Tara's case.